Hello, I am Lucas Agustin. This is the podcast Napokek, and today I have Petr Moroz with me. Good day. Today we have a very important current topic, Peter. I know you didn't want to be introduced as an expert on fraud and security and scams, but you also do automation, simplifying work, and so on. But the topic today will be, let's not lie, a lot about security because I have had several guests here and scientists who deal with artificial intelligence and wisifte narame where a potential problem might be looming over us. As in that problem is related to AI and of course involves fraud, for example, in employment and so on. So if I just ask simply at the beginning, how easy is it today to fraudulently get employed somewhere, grab a paycheck, steal data, and run away if I wanted to?
When you want.
If I want to.
It's not difficult at all. In fact, it's very simple from my point of view. I think it's about two things. It's about how much I want it, or on the other hand, how much the other side ignores it. And you touched on an interesting concept that I call shitty work. When we talk about fraud and about someone wanting to steal data and maybe misuse it and similar, or very often with clients or with students, for example, at universities where I lecture on the topic. But from my point of view, the risk is much more interesting, perhaps even monetarily. Hopefully, we won't advise anyone specifically, but the concept is very simple. Today, for example, if I were to scrape data from LinkedIn or other networks, where theoretically I learned that the company opened a specific position that might be interesting, and is remote, then I can apply. I can go through the interview myself.
For example, programmers who are in high
Very
demand.
often, and probably the most frequent from this perspective. I get the job, but then I kind of pass the job on to someone else to do it, or I'll do it myself, but very, very poorly. And if I want to repeat this with several companies at once, or repeat it with several companies consecutively, or rather successively, then I wouldn't want to destroy my so-called real identity. They could sue me, they might want lost profits and so on. So I would create a fake identity or use someone else's stolen identity.
That is probably the Verif tools, the tool, if I'm not mistaken.
For example, it is essentially a generator, let's say, of documents from Photoshop templates. But it's one of the tools. Recently, he released, for instance, some kind of some researchers published possibilities of using tools like ChatGPT or others to generate the image. So today it's not really difficult how and what, but whether it meets some security parameters or passes some security checks if the company uses them. However,
By the way, we will talk a lot more about that later. That's a big if, as they would say in America.
Those security measures, it's true.
the problem is that if I do this and hide behind some fictitious identity, behind some non-existent identity, I won't log into Teams for 3 months or turn on the camera and so on, but I'll do some work. Every month you'll probably send me an invoice or I'll send you an invoice and you'll send me the money. We'll even get to the point where I can do it so that I'm not the one invoicing as myself, as an individual, but someone else does it for me.
Some entity, perhaps.
Some entity. And I get to the point where I send invoices for 2 or 3 months. Maybe you won't pay me for the third one, but how much does a good developer make today? If it's a full stack developer, it will be 150 plus. So I'll get from 3 companies at once, 3 times 150,000. I have them at home. And either I gave, say, 50 to someone in India who worked for me for a while. Or heaven forbid, today it would be AI tools where I generated something before the employer finds out, or the client if I'm self-employed. Well, and I have enough at home that I don't actually have to work for the rest of the year. So 3 months were enough for me to do absolutely nothing, but I didn't have to pretend to work. And that, I think, is the crux of the matter.
That's disgusting because these fraudsters, they exploit the kind of goodwill of these companies. Like in the first months, you have that trial period, which should be for you to prove yourself. On the other hand, sometimes it's regarded as a sort of grace period, like, sure, he's not that fast. Maybe he doesn't respond every 5 minutes, but we'll leave it for another month or so. But yeah, just that month costs hundreds of thousands. But what I'm interested in, for example, when someone opens YouTube today and watches various scams and those farms in India or Russia and so on, where it is quite widespread, it's usually like this. There's a group, they have a script, and for example, they call people and say, I'm support from Microsoft and there's something wrong with your account. Send me Bitcoin, give me all your savings, right? On the other hand, I'm thinking, isn't it perhaps a trend that the same houses, do they switch to this here? Because this is much simpler,
That's
right?
just
When
how
you
it
have 5
is.
programmers with you, you'll get some work done precisely as you said, and the money is at home.
That's just the way it is. And it's not only with the bad work. I called it a bit differently, but in work that is not entirely effective or honest. But it's also the case in organized crime, where these are gangs that deliberately infiltrate companies, and they are really human farms who pass the interview in such a way that, and I sat with several clients who they went through the interview with that person until the end. They really wanted to appoint him as maybe a CTO or a full stack developer or. And only the screening at the end maybe showed that the person is not who they claim to be, but they were like a minute away from signing the contract and would have really given him access, given the source codes, given just everything, because on the other side, there is not a person who is a student and lacks sufficient qualifications. There is a very experienced person who knows exactly what they are after. And that is the other side of the coin, that the threat can be multiple times and has several different aspects that need to be considered. So one thing is the threat or the risk, respectively, and that is data theft, misuse, competitive struggle, industrial espionage.
Which often isn't even covered in contracts, but so many companies don't have contracts of such high quality that they could enforce these things. That's just a side
Well,
note.
definitely. I think that contract or a declaration of honor is more like an alibi to me, where we pass some responsibility onto someone and say, hey, we had a contract with them, like, so they broke the contract, but with some supplier who delivered, but what can you do? Because the damage falls on you as the company. It won't go after that supplier, most likely, at least not the reputational risk of violating any legal norms, like, say, financing terrorism, money laundering. It's all on you. As in, you didn't do due diligence if you blindly trusted and said, but we had an affidavit. So again, you need to look at it from several different angles. Or if I want to understand it, then I have to perceive it from several different perspectives, and not just one. Someone deceived the HR person or the buyer. That's just the way they got in, and not why they went there, and what the company is facing, what it wants to protect.
When we look at the world isn't exactly that big, Gide, where is the biggest problem right now, and how is Europe doing?
I think that it is the same everywhere. It is exactly the same in its size.
But we have GDPR, haha.
Now the question is whether that is good or bad. Maybe we'll get to that. On the other hand, when I think about it, yes, the world that has like this, Chinese companies very likely will not be from facing industrial espionage by the Chinese government. They are regulated by the Chinese government, so they have to share the information anyway. Very likely. Russian companies, as the phrase goes, they simply have some rules, and if you don't follow them, you'll end up in a gulag. So they probably don't have to face espionage from these countries. I might just return to the point that the biggest global player in the market of industrial espionage and these infiltration techniques or methods, respectively, is the North Korean government.
North Korean? I was expecting Nigeria or maybe India.
No. North Korea and all the profits, so ransomware, malware, anything else. Actually, how I got it into the company, because I need to get those backdoors into the company. And very often it's because I've placed all the cases that we published and wrote about simply from Czech television to Reporter and similar.
By the way, Google it. It's incredible once you see the data behind it and those stories. I recommend it.
Thank you. So these are all North Korean employees or hackers.
So if I understand correctly, North Korea, which has only 10% electricity in the entire country, uses it for this.
No, the entire weapons program, which means that the weapons industry of the North Korean government is funded by cybercrime. And this is publicly traceable, and it is pointed out by all security forces in the world, from the FBI to the European Commission and so on. Then maybe we will get to why we regulate something, precisely because we know what we are facing. So it's not that a North Korean hacker would choose some Czech hospital in Asia because he thinks, oh, that probably won't be very secure. No, he will know what the elements are, whether of the critical infrastructure or of the state that he is observing. Here we might have a specific technology that they will want to breach because they know it's in 90% of offices worldwide. And if I take something like Logitech and similar, then that will be a logical target for me, because if I get to development, if I get to the source codes, it is very likely that I will find some backdoor or some vulnerability that I can exploit, or I will process it myself and make it accessible. Before it is discovered, I can already be gone. No one will connect it to me 6 months later, but in the morning, the X-rays stop working, computers will be locked, and it could have been through a supplier, a body shopping person. This is the real problem in the world we live in. We just close our eyes to it, or often don't realize it and tell ourselves it can't happen to us, which is the most common argument that...
You mentioned body shopping, right? So what I couldn't help but notice, I work in HR, is that LinkedIn, which I'm not criticizing now, on the contrary, I know that LinkedIn banned how many accounts in the first half of last year? 20 million accounts, I think, fraudulent. 80 million accounts, you heard correctly, right? 80. So they are fighting it, but I'm not joking. Yesterday it happened to me at work, Our company posted one ad on a server where we hadn't advertised before, and at the same time posted the job on LinkedIn. Within an hour, I had about 50 responses. We see it's clear you're looking for people, we have it for you. Or I'd receive, hey, I'm a programmer, I see you're looking, but it all came really within 15 to 40 minutes or so. That's kind of inviting, isn't it?
I think that the fact that someone scrapes profiles or uses tools like Clay and similar ones today to identify opportunities for where to send someone, even ethically minded companies that want to provide someone to you will do this effectively.
For example, employment agencies. By the way, there are 22,000 of them in the Czech Republic, just like castles and chateaux. Sorry,
How
that was
much,
unnecessary.
once again?
2,000.
Personnel agencies?
And castles and chateaus too. Wow. Like entities that operate in that field.
I didn't even know that. Thank you. Look, I would guess like hundreds, but...
And if you had to
never-
pick 5 good ones, it would be difficult.
I wouldn't want to offend anyone here. But let's return to the fact that...
And they, of course, kind of compete in the competitive market over who delivers whom and how quickly one responds. So only after they offer someone to you will they actually go look for one. Either they have some database, so they repost your ad with a different title, and there sits the scout waiting. Hey, it's full stack, it's security, it's a type of position described exactly for what we're looking at, where we know there's the highest likelihood that there will be honey. That we will take, whether data or some technical, simply some technology and so on. And even if I don't know which end client it is, I can tell from the description that it's a large multinational technology company, full stack developer, you will be a team leader, you will conduct code reviews and so on. Ideal. So although all the cases that we maybe worked on or have documented, in most cases they are automated LinkedIn ones, and they even adjust the LinkedIn profile on the fly, like in real time, because they have a whole set of LinkedIn profiles that they use and adjust them to fit the specific position. That means they change the descriptions, adjust the previous employers and so on, and then they might apply for the job. So when it gets into the hands of the recruiter, they're looking at a profile that exactly matches. Here, I would
Keywords, right, all that sort
Exactly.
of thing.
If I were just a little smarter, I would first tap you once, then a second time, then a third time only on the profile. I would check it out and not even apply. You would find me yourself because you use the same techniques they use. So you will see. Look, he checked us out, has open to work on his profile, looks great, fits our profile, so I will reach out to him.
Yes, they often have quite a few connections on LinkedIn because that's also being scraped. Well, those are automations. It's very simple.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so they really do reuse this. And now it's just a truth, or rather a question, what part of it is true, or it's, and I call it window shopping, because the showcase looks exactly how you want the ideal candidate to look. It's like they exploit the vulnerabilities of the person whose only key performance indicator is how quickly they fill the position.
Sorry if I might have offended some HR professionals.
But we
No,
were.
you're right, really.
They often discussed in banking that I historically led a team of the fraud investigators at a large American bank in Europe, which was a great school because all that top management in security or fraud were ex-US Secret Service, simply agents and the like. So we really went to the headquarters of the American Secret Service for training on whistleblowing, interviewing, and so on.
Whistleblowing is only done when you're upset.
Exactly. But that's what happens. But the interviewing and such, and there it was beautifully apparent that it's just a question of motivation. It's just a question of basically who wants to believe whom. And the problem is that even back then, and that's some 15 years, back then there was a lot of discussion within GE, that was the bank, and it was widely debated that an HR person cannot be positively evaluated just for meeting KPIs in terms of filling a position within a week, but also how poorly they filled it when problems arise. So not really a penalty, but not a bonus either, rather a penalty. And it was never implemented because everyone was simply afraid. But it has some merit, although I'm not saying they should have sole responsibility. For us, for Scout, like for the tool, the HR person is a user, but not a decision maker. They won't purchase us. HR rarely comes and says, I would like to screen candidates.
That doesn't happen.
Very little, very rarely. Someone like compliance, legal will come.
Owner. And it's like that syndrome of the neighbor's burnt down barn. When the neighbor's tavern or barn burns down, I buy a fire extinguisher.
Oh, sorry, that doesn't make sense. When I, as an HR person in my team, let's say, we do recruitment, we handle administration, and I might hire someone who has 15 debts. So it's also in my interest to make a good decision on whether to hire that person, because it's really a lot of extra administration, you know. I find it a bit paradoxical, what you're saying.
But that's unfortunately how it is. It's not like that in the States. It's not like that in developed Europe. That means Great Britain, let's say in the Czech Republic, and in similar countries like those of the former, let's say post-Soviet Union or Soviet bloc, it is like that. And I do believe to some extent that the argumentation is absolutely logical. That generation that probably manages HR today in those top positions, or at least part of it still does, remembers background checks, screenings in a completely different connotation, and it's terribly difficult to convince them that fact-checking or truth verification is not vetting or screening. We do not, or screening, even if they did it themselves, it is not profiling. It is deciding based on things that are real and true, not on my feeling or impression that I gained from something, or the need to fill that position.
I'll return to one, I think the third question I asked today, and that's about enforceability, you know. I would really be interested, let's say, exactly, I am GE, for example, I use an agency. The agency, just as you said, uses scraping. It's quite normal, and they get a Chinese troll who steals my database. What can I do about it? Like, is it the law? Can you calmly say that the law works and I can achieve something if I have, for example, a quality contract? Or is it just your high?
In banking, I used to say that whoever steals a little is a thief, and whoever steals a lot is a partner for negotiation. And it makes sense putting it into that context. The moment I make the owner of a large staffing agency look like a fool because he provided me with a Chinese spy or North Korean one, neither of us saw it that way. I showed that I let someone be provided. I even break or damage my brand, that of my large multinational company. So very likely by the end of the year, he will provide me with everything for free, and I will agree on some fine quietly, but it will never get out. None of them are interested in letting it get out. And I know those cases, and they are here in the Czech Republic. Not only
Because they misunderstand it deliberately, right? Like that.
like this, ignorance of the law does not excuse, and similarly, ignoring completely obvious facts does not excuse the company. I know many, probably out of those 2,000, I know many, and thank God there are so many, because now we can't say whether he meant us or someone else. I know many headhunters or recruitment agencies who say screening. We don't want that at all, because we would never place anyone anywhere again.
Or we would have to pay for it, right? That's also a
That's
hurdle.
a smaller argument than but we wouldn't place that person anywhere because we would almost always find something somewhere.
Sure, and the growth of the business is to deliver, right?
And are they again motivated to place that person there? And maybe with this, I'll sort of return to the question that was about GDPR. Or rather generally, what is the purpose of regulation? I am by no means an advocate for regulation. On the other hand, it is necessary to place it in some sort of context. If I do not specifically require specific measures from companies, then they themselves are very unlikely to implement them. Or some enlightened ones. For instance, regarding scouts, I think we do 80% of screenings abroad and 20% in the Czech Republic, approximately. And we are a Czech company, we speak Czech, and we primarily have Czech products for Czech clients. And now we are, and this is where we originated. We have enlightened clients who have been using us from the beginning. We have clients who only come because someone wants and requires it from them. That means, I don't know. Here, a water producer says nobody will enter the company who doesn't have verification or did not pass the screening for our minimum standard, which we apply to our own employees. So we will require ABC. When someone is going to supply people to the company, they might come to us for the screening and say, hey, I need this, and I need it as fast as possible because I have to onboard them tomorrow. They won't do this for any other client because that other client doesn't want it from them. That client very likely doesn't want it because they are unaware of it. That means a lack of knowledge. Okay, that's our mistake, and thank you for inviting me. Or the second option, his mother wants it from him. This means our client will typically be a large American company here in Prague or in the Czech Republic, from which the mother company mandates it and simply says, this is our standard. And then they start doing it. And then the market will change as well. That means I know that, for example, HR professionals or recruiters who use Scout in company A, then move to company B, and the first thing they do is implement Scout, so they already know it. They already know it will make their work easier, faster, and so on and so on. But convincing them from the outside and coming and saying, I have a great idea for you, and it will cost you 300 crowns per
a person or 1% of their recruitment costs. Nobody wants that.
Sure, someone's trying to sell me something again. But in the Swede checks are still pretty resilient. But to actually get to the solution, right? I might unusually, because clearly one solution is simply to realize, hey, we need to invest in this, especially for those sensitive roles. It should be like a must. It should be like, of course, but I would be interested if you have any recommendations, let's say more like soft ones, for example, what to focus on, like whether to always use references with those people, whether you really should always verify that, or if there are other tricks to recognize that it could be fraud or a fraudster. It occurs to me, for example, that they don't have any activity on their LinkedIn, even though they have 4,000 connections, or things like those as indicators.
There will be plenty of those. I will try to suggest or mention some. In any case, I am definitely not an advocate of screening, unblock everyone to the same level. That doesn't make sense. This means in every company, if they want to consider something, someone should first sit down and say, what categories of positions do we have? This means someone who deals with cash, someone who has access to client data, someone who can control financial transactions and accounts, someone who has access to source code, and so on. And those people, as they categorize, or those positions should say, okay, and now why does a specific thing interest us? This means we are interested in current debts, past due amounts, meaning execution, insolvency, for someone who cleans the coffee machine or refills it. Probably not.
No.
So are we interested in this for a person who handles cash or has access to the vault room? Probably yes.
Probably
So there I
yes.
would say, or goods in storage, yes, or pharmaceuticals, manufacturing simply, or an ambulance driver because they have access to drugs, to morphine, and so on. It really can just be about that. What is the lure for a person? And we would probably have today's episode for 2 or 3 hours if I had to go into what the fraud triangle is and how a person gets to the point of starting to cheat, because there has to be some rationalization or justification. The pressure itself and the opportunity, that's the control system, meaning I control or I don't control. Rationalization is the ethical code. Tone from the top, corporate behavior. Managers behave fairly, everyone me. The whole team works well, so we handle this, and that's the justification. And the pressure That's the debts, the collectors at your neck. That's when my husband is fired from his job or has already been fired and we can't manage the mortgage.
That's like we have to eat something, right?
Of course, and there's nothing I can do about it. Very likely. But I can know about it early enough to prevent the person from getting into that spiral. First, they borrowed 100, then it was 1,000. And because no one checked, now it's 1,000,000. And not that appetite grows with eating, but the opportunity simply, once a person gets into it, it gets worse and worse. So,
not to be blind.
Sorry, let me expand on this. When you see, let's say, the first execution in your life, I'd venture to say that more than half are executions. I borrowed 16,000 with an interest rate of 40%, and it's now 380,000, and I can't get out of it. It's crazy here.
it can really start with something as small as public transport. Like, I have my first executor on my hands, and then it came because I will ignore it for 8 years. Suddenly, it's already 200,000. I have nowhere to get it. I borrow quickly, then I didn't pay it back, or God forbid, drugs, gambling, just all those things. And for me, they are. So if I return to what interests me, first I know what I'm focusing on. When we talked before, let's say about that person who already did it somewhere else or behaved before we fired him because we didn't have the nerves, or we were missing something else and we just kept him for 2 or 3 months and then we weren't satisfied.
We didn't want to give him the paper, that something was
Worse,
happening.
in my opinion, is when the next employer doesn't call the previous one to ask about it. Those are the references. Because if I don't do it, then each of us carries some history. For example, I'm not basically interested, and that's perhaps important to say again, I'm not interested in what the person did 20 years ago. I was doing completely different things 20 years ago, but I was already doing investigations. But I didn't do, or rather I certainly behaved differently. And it doesn't give a quality image of me. So for the position I'm in, I'm interested in the current, or 3, 5, or 7 years back, and best practices anywhere in the world, 3, 5, 7. I always ask the client. That's the first thing we're interested in, 3, 5, or 7 years. And depending on the seniority of the position and so on, we might ask about the last 3 employers, whether 7 years or just the last one.
So really, at the expense of 3 employers.
But that's, for instance, SOC 2. As a certification or as required, it says 7 years.
The American one, right? We have those ISO.
Yes, we have ISO 27000 and 27002, which is an implementation documentation for it, or a kind of guideline.
Which is almost the same as SOV.
Yes, and it also says the last 3 employers or 7 years, current debts, education, and so on. 271, that's what someone certifies you for. It just says you have the system in place.
You declare that we are doing it.
But how to implement it is 272. And it precisely lists these checks exactly because it maps them to the risks or to the threats that the person may pose.
If you were wondering what on earth are we talking about now, yeah, we really got into the technical stuff, but you can imagine having a business that is expanding a lot. You might have a very successful e-shop, so many large clients, I don't know, like Walmarts, Alberts, Lidl's, will probably not want to enter into a contract with you unless you have that certification. Even that number 2-1, which is kind of the highest, because it gives them the assurance that you, as their partner, you simply won't mess it up by, for example, having a data leak and such things.
We might not even need to go as far as a large successful e-shop. It could be any supplier, perhaps just a truck driver for Volkswagen or some other company, because in Germany and the rest of Europe, the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act will soon also apply, which says if you are part of our supply chain, we need to know if there is any threat, any risk, if you are transporting something that is a security risk, and so on. Who is the driver? Did they identify themselves? Do they have a criminal record?
What do you do when it happens? What is the procedure, and so on?
So and we're still around the regulation. I didn't want to delve into a specific IS, but the regulation sets, and I can clearly see it in the difference between
Don't fall asleep yet. This will be interesting.
Between ISM and SOKM, there is one big difference. SOK requires from the auditor that the auditor knows or looks at the evidence and says, show me the screening reports for the last 3 people, for the last 3 hires. ISO says you should have this, and the auditor is likely to ask, are you doing it? We are. Okay, checked off. That's a big difference. So regulation is here, more for this purpose, to ensure that there is some minimum. By the way, now, the law on critical infrastructure will affect hundreds of companies in the Czech Republic, particularly the suppliers of that critical infrastructure as well. And in the draft of the law, I don't know when you are planning to release this, but it should pass in an expedited reading now in May. That means the law should be effective in October. And it states every employee, or even there is a definition of a worker, which is an employee or a self-employed person. Company or its supplier must undergo verification. Identity and verification of a clean criminal record. And this is not based on Czech law, but it comes from the European Directive CR Critical Entity Resilience. So anyone among the listeners today who applies, whether it is a small IT company, or a body shop, or a driver for the logistics chain and so on, or for a meat processing plant. Yes, even meat processing plants fall under it because they are critical infrastructure or a public transport driver. Will need to have a record that screening for identity and criminal record has taken place.
So the problem is really piling up, and we already know it. When even the law is doing something about it, then it must be serious. But anyway, this was one of the clues, Sadiki. Are there any others? Like if I go on LinkedIn tomorrow or somewhere, what else should I watch out for? I've already called the references. Sure, it looks good so far.
I basically say when something looks too good to be true, it usually isn't true. So it's necessary to look at it a bit skeptically. I think I wouldn't expect, and even though I often hear it from clients, well, I'll see. If it were a potato stamp, I'd recognize it. And that's exactly the problem, that today it's not at all about a potato stamp, especially in the era of generative AI. So I actually can't rely on my own eyes. Inch can, in terms of feelings, in terms of, hey, that looks too stylized, all those LinkedIn profiles that I have historically seen, and that's the last few years back, well, that they all started exactly the same. They were like carbon copies. Simply the job title, professional with 20 years experience, full stack developer. Yes, exactly. And you see, that's exactly it. So I've been through this, I know it, and this is what I look at when it generates.
And ChatGPT, by the way, yeah, exactly.
That's going to be worse now because we won't trust anyone who wrote it themselves because they don't know how to stylize a profile, so they wrote it. There are plenty of generators that write your CV for you. So for me, it's harder and harder to distinguish bluff from truth. And then it really comes down to some sort of principled experience. Is the person evasive? Unfortunately, even with advanced AI in terms of deepfake, it is getting harder and harder, and there are many videos available as deepfake interviews. For example, on YouTube, where it initially started with very poor quality overlays, like having a fictional background behind me. I can actually have a fictional face.
That happened to Dalibor from Jim Beam, by the way.
Yes. And here, when I look at it, during those interviews, we really had those ASICs there. That means he did say, and now honestly speaking, ask a Vietnamese person in the Czech Republic if by chance it's not really a fake identity. Why? So he was born here. He's like the third generation, which is absolutely fine. And I wouldn't judge the client for not asking the one who has a Danish passport and is Asian. Features, I won't ask that way. Yeah, that all of a sudden there's a European sitting there who looks like Lukasz, but I can already tell by the voice. Yet in a month, it'll be completely different. I won't even know if it's Lukasz or if it sounds like him, and it'll just be great. So I think an even bigger problem will occur there than where we are today. Worse for me is that we haven't even caught up with the original train of when it was simple. And now we actually have to persuade for where it will be very complex. And some companies, in my opinion, will not catch the train. And then it's just waiting for a big problem.
Well, exactly. It seems to me that this is one of those things, like, we don't need it until the first problem happens, you know? That's exactly how it is. That's what's so incredibly dangerous about it. And really nowadays, when I think about it, the Czech Republic has many software houses. You know, Prague and Brno are full of software houses, but at the same time, the Czech Republic has the most logistics companies per capita in the world, you know? And that is critical infrastructure. That is also a potential target. And in the Czech Republic, we talk a lot about the biggest shortage being IT specialists, but we actually lack sheet metal workers, kitchen assistants, and drivers the most, right? Those are the most endangered ones. On the other hand, there's probably less risk of frauds and so on there. But I really think it's time for companies to make it a standard. And I'm not saying this to advertise Scout. I'm saying it because it's inevitable before this becomes a really big issue, right?
I'm thinking about how long ago it might be, and I think it was about 10 years ago when I actually came up with the initial idea of employee screening. And back then, let's say a manager cost 18,000 crowns, like a report for some high management position. because it was very manual. There was no automation. Everything had to be done manually and properly based on power of attorney for court, for the tax office, and so on. And back then, I talked to a person who built and then sold a very efficient or very successful American international screening agency. And back then, I hired him as a mentor to help me sort through some ideas. And he says to me, hey, what do you do and how do you do it? So I described to him that product. And he says to me, aha, so you're 20 years behind America. I reply, wait, what do you mean? Well, 20 years ago, we did paper-based exercises like this with a checklist and all that. And today we have everything automated and the client clicks in some HR system. And I said that will never happen. Sorry, 20 years, 10 years.
That sounds like Checker.
Well, not then, but yes. And that's actually when the idea of checkers came about, which were two Uber employees. That's how Checker was created, who did background checks. And they realized how terribly paper-based it was. So they built automation, and today it is a multi-billion-dollar company. And they actually, that's where the original idea of Scout came about, more or less around that time, when I said, hey, this should be possible here too. Let's bridge those 10 years, because we won't teach someone something and sell it for 5 years, only to leave it afterward. So I've actually been trying from the beginning of Scout to think about what could be automated and how. And that's why we have a technological lead of about 5 years. And today it's hard for anyone to catch up if they want to have quality within Europe, because you had to already think about what's next. And today we again have to think about what's next.
Sure, a city, and now we'll reward everyone who stuck around until the end, because you have some incredible stories behind you. For those who thought that today these checks are just about clicking something in the system, hitting enter, sending, and it comes back to you. Yeah. Is it okay? Then they would be mistaken. Tell us some of the most action-packed stories you've experienced.
Wow. Because you sometimes go really in depth.
I enjoyed historically my entire life since I was 18. I've made a living from risk management and fraud investigation. So I've been through those investigations elsewhere, and I'm not trying to integrate them into Scout at all. Scout is really like fact-checking. But when you pass by a case that might be interesting, because you say, hey, this is strange, and now you have those warning like flashing balloons or like they fly. So you say, let's take a look at that. And maybe I invite that person for an interview or agree with the client if we can do a mock interview. And
you're like a check scammer payback.
Yeah, and I have often thought, like, if I had someone with me who knows how to record and so on, I bet if we posted the position now, within 3 or 4 hours, we'd have one of those fraudsters and we could film and process it perfectly. We haven't done that to this day.
We could do a live stream next time, maybe.
We can try that, but it would really be worth it. However, perhaps the most interesting and entertaining from my side was indeed the first North Korean hacker. We discovered it by accident. A client who had already used our services was about to fill this very sensitive position, CTO potentially, or rather the head of development. Sorry, they really got far simply because these were interviews. And why not? And the person, because they had screening in place, they simply knew they had to. And that, so at the moment when simply before they gave him the offer, so just the last step, offer. So before they gave him the offer, they sent him for screening to Scout. Or rather, they initiated screening at Scout.
Excuse me, I just want to ask, because we talked earlier about those software hints, is it a good idea to directly state in the offers that the offer is conditional on passing a security clearance?
I definitely wouldn't write a security clearance there. Like, I know screening definitely. For example, Amazon has it written in all their ads unblock. I don't know, I just checked it recently, but it simply states if we were to give you an offer, then yes. For me, it is like one of the best basic mechanisms, because I really like the analogy of one, and now I've veered away from that example, but I'll return to it. The analogy of a colleague who has a very successful French screening company. And when I told him, look, we're not able to penetrate the banking market in the Czech Republic, we're just not succeeding, even though it is the most vulnerable one, which simply is. And we really don't have a single client. And he says, look, we didn't have it for a long time either. And then I played on the note, like the personal note of the ego to those directors. How did you do it? I always met with one of them. So I say, you're like those exclusive night businesses on that French Avenue, you know, Champs-Élysées, and everyone wants to come to you. But those great businesses, they have that bouncer outside, that doorman, and they choose who to let in. You don't do screening. You're you're the ones who don't have any bouncer there, and all the riffraff that couldn't get in anywhere else comes to you, he says. And today I have signed a contract with everyone. I haven't tried it yet, but maybe someone is watching now. But that's really how it is. And again, the comparison fits. The person just tries, but when they see that the company AB Banca CZ
Just doing the screening, so why should I try it? Why should I waste energy when I know that another 16 don't do it? Exactly. So I'll just try it. Yeah.
it's just really about mentality.
And if I go back to that, they knew it's our standard, so they simply initiated a screening for him, and he received an invitation to scout. He signed up, did the ID check, which means proving his identity if the client has it in their package for this. So he showed an ID card from one side, the other side of the ID card or passport, whatever it was then, and himself for face comparison with the document. He went to the next step, filled in employment history and so on, or rather, sorry, professional history and so on. He signed the authorization for Scout, allowing us to verify those things. Well, the first thing that failed was the document verification, because the technology that Scout integrates can recognize if I show a photo on the camera, a mobile, or any other device, or even show it printed on paper. We can tell that the document is not the real document. It doesn't have the correct reflections, refractions, depth, sharpness, and so on. That's the good artificial intelligence, how it, he says, that is not even, well, yes, that is embroidery machines. Yes, exactly. So like the models work great for now, and liveness, the so-called liveness detection is simply perfectly. Similarly, I don't have to turn my head to say, yes, the person is alive, blink, and so on, but we can already tell from the photograph that shows up on the computer that everything is happening in real time, and we knew that. So we went deeper and looked at the document and said, look, but this is like a liveness check, which failed, and now the analyst is dealing with it, so they come and consult. We already had some clues where, or because we knew where these documents could be created and so on. I demonstrated it live at Evolvo about 3 years ago. During my presentation, I stole from Peter, based on a photo from the web, I created the identity of a completely different person, a fictional ID card, a fictional passport on stage in 5 minutes. And from the stage, he was told to go to hell.
By the way, your birthdays are 2 days apart. Another interesting fact. Yes, his was in July, yours is tomorrow. So I have to congratulate.
So we showed this. And because we knew that, because there you actually choose also in that very tools, which you mentioned, if someone wanted to and wouldn't do it from their mobile or at least through a VPN, then it's verytools.net. And it's just one of those tools where you can buy it. So $8 for a Czech passport or a Czech ID, that costs only $8, right? Yes, but sometimes they are on sale. So, for example, Estonian or Danish, you can buy for about $2.99. A Ukrainian ID or passport they buy for about $1.99. So they have APs and make up to 500 documents in a few seconds. Yeah, like really, by the way, if someone looks at SimilarWeb as if I'm not lying, SimilarWeb or other comparison tools, when you look at verytools.net, first it tells you the others because it knows where people are going. It shows you demographics. So on average, it's a person 30 to 35 years old, approximately, and it's around 250,000 visits per month just on that one website. By the way, even if I were to overlook the fact that, of course, sometimes it can be objectively used for a good cause. That means, as far as I know, in Hong Kong, a lot of fictional documents were created during those riots or those protests against Chinese, and similarly, so just for that, to be able to register on some websites and the like, so they just used, which is probably a large minority then. Well, according to the statistics I did on SimilarWeb at that time, it was quite a significant amount of traffic, but then the way of searching or the goal might be, for example, from Ukraine for a residence permit or a work permit and so on. And again, I'm not judging. Then it will be Czechia and it will be a passport and it will be for something else. Then I'll get to the second funny thing if we still have time, but to another funny story. I recently wrote about it on LinkedIn, but so we said, okay, we know that this person is a fraud. We know that the photo he had on LinkedIn,
So he was climbing somewhere in the mountains, and I have talked about this before, and it was here in the reporter. So if someone hears it a second time, I apologize, and maybe I'll add some information. He was simply climbing somewhere in the mountains with a backpack. When we took that photo and put it into Google image search, it came up that it was from a photo bank just for backpacks and similar. So we found a lot of e-shops where that photograph was. So we first briefed the client and said, look, here you have 20 different clues why he is lying, and now get in touch with him. And then we want to get in touch with him again. So there were 2 interviews, once by them and once by us. The paradox is that immediately after that, because he wasn't able, they just said like, hey, share your screen. He shared his screen, said, open Google, show me the blue dot, like show me where you are, which is perfect because it doesn't occur to the person at that moment how to defend themselves. So he turned off the sharing again. Why? Turn it back on. It doesn't work for me. So on and so on. I actually show calls like this quite often, for example, at the University of Economics, where I sometimes give lectures on compliance, or at the Czech Banking Association. Or if anyone wanted, I would really gladly come to a company and then talk about it. So I use it there precisely to show people how it actually works, because they are caught off guard at a certain moment. They can't answer a very basic question, what's a specific dish in Denmark? What do you eat there? He knows where the map is. He more or less knows how to describe it, zooms in somewhere.
You grilled him like that, the poor fraudster.
Yeah. And it was really fun. And then when a colleague of ours, who the CTO had, told him, and I myself asked him later, I said, hey, how was the interview? And he said, great. He's technically perfect, like I couldn't fault him on anything. And then when you ask him where he got the passport, by the way, he's wearing glasses and you can perfectly see the fluorescent lights above him. It must be like a hall where they sit like in those cubicles similar to in India. So I think it will be similar.
By the way, one more important thing today. When someone writes to me, I'll send it to you. I can't say the name. But today there are integrations into Zoom where you have those, and it's just AI that generates responses for you live when someone is talking to you. So today, even when you have a very specific technical interview with someone, you just sit there. It looks like you're looking at the camera, but you're only glancing a bit to the right. There, the responses are scrolling in the chat.
Yes, they even have a transparent overlay. So you look directly through it, and it's as if he is writing code for you straight away and so on.
So it doesn't show that he is averting his eyes to the side.
Yes. And when you share the screen, it's not visible there. Yeah, like great. And today we encountered that there are of course, attempts to insert like deepfake or videos like video injection or image injection exactly into that ID process and so on. That is why it might be necessary to say that possibly even we don't develop everything that's in Scout. In my opinion, we are building a very high quality and robust architecture or platform that allows us to automate processes so far and adjust governance and compliance controls as the client needs. And of course, personal data protection and similar matters. But we always integrate the best available on the market at that moment on ID verification, on identifying document forgeries, on verifying information, on whether there's any deepfake injection. So we actually integrate it into the process so the client doesn't have to. And it's actually included within the value of that one check, for example.
And how did it turn out with Mr. Huang?
Well, they didn't hire him. Of course, on the other hand, they were kind of glad that he wasn't.
But there was no legal case against him?
Where will you go? No, we worked with some sort of an unnamed component where we, of course, shared that information because we took the time to map out whether there are any other relevant profiles and where it leads. And we actually identified North Korea in all aspects, documented it thoroughly, and handed it over for them to just... Possibly the state is dealing with it or not. I think it is. I have no reason not to believe it isn't. The problem is that then we have those 99% of private clients who have no idea or who have no idea that something like this exists. On the other hand, when I promised a funny story, we recently put intercom on our website so that a client could simply write to us in the chat if they want to meet us or something similar. Not a day goes by without 2 or 3 requests like, I need a fake ID, I need a copy, and then they send you their face. So, girls on OnlyFans and similar. And when I'm bored or stuck in traffic, I tend to reply to those.
On OnlyFans.
To those girls, yes. I choose who, yes. So they write well, great. And what should appear on that document? And do we have a number? And from which state? And now they start, right? So sometimes it's a bot that just spams but they have to look for it. And because we were in Reporter and we were actually the first European company to point it out and document the mess, we have a very good Google rating for this, for fake ID and similar. So there are interesting cases. The sad one is about a week old, or rather it will be about 2 months old. But a week ago, I made a post on LinkedIn where I posted pictures of that boy, a 13-year-old boy or an 11-year-old boy who, from somewhere in Brazil or wherever he was from, wrote that he needed a fake ID to register on PayPal. And because I will feel sorry for him, and then he even sent his photo and so on, I realized that it really won't be a bot. So I started talking to him through a translator later, and I understood that he received an offer, an email or WhatsApp that he received an offer, set up a PayPal account, we'll send you money, you keep 10%. You'll forward the rest further, so it's plain money laundering. If that boy were in Europe, in Brazil, honestly, I'm not sure. If he were in Europe, he would simply face quite a nasty penalty for it, as would his parents. And there are many such troubles. It can really be anything small that looks bad. By the way, do you have Revolut? How often do you receive information or an offer that if you refer a friend, they will give 3,000 crowns?
About 600 times a day.
So each time create a registration on Verif Tools. With that, register in Revolut and you have 600 times 3,000 crowns.
Are you serious?
Well, right? So those tools do exist for that. Sorry, I hope I wasn't encouraging anyone.
Some communities have become rich thanks to you with this podcast of mine.
Bitcoin sucks compared to this. It's like, but this is like anything. A loyalty program like...
On the other hand, if Revolut finds out and catches you, then you are in trouble, right? Because it's not that hard to find out.
Well, if they verified that those accounts were just somehow suspicious, which probably is possible.
Sure, and that's exactly it. I want to believe, and I do believe that they have quality ID verification, and so on and so on and so on.
They also have face scanning.
Yes, but and then at the same time, I sometimes demonstrate, like during those trainings, for example, I take a photo and cut out the eyes and I can pass some ID verifications just by putting it in front like this and blinking, right? And it takes the photo, actually captures like a photo, compares it to what's on the document, which is also an AI-generated photo. It matches, great, automated check completed. So selecting suppliers or processes or tools like technology suppliers, I meant it's always better to know what I'm facing. On the other hand, not to make it just ugly about people. Even Revolut needs as many users as possible because it has investors, because it needs to show some impact. So it's not always nice, like black and white. And the question is, where does that particular listener or specialist sit and what are they facing? What is the threat to them? Yes, because if the company discovers that it is funding or rather employing a North Korean hacker or, heaven forbid, some kind of government agent, then it faces sanctions from the UN because it is violating sanction lists and a lot of other things. Ignorance is no excuse. The Czech Supreme Public Prosecutor's Office clearly stated simply, if a company wants to exonerate itself from criminal liability, it means the company as such and its management must do everything to manage the company and compliance effectively, including, for example, screening employees. So it's not like, it's not black and white, but the technology sure makes it easier.
What the heck makes things like the selections easier? That's probably the last question that interests me, because a lot of companies choose their employees, the more enlightened companies. By that, I think at least it goes with some so-called case, meaning some case study, to actually verify that you know something, right? I would be interested in what your specific recommendation is, because many companies do this. They give me a homework assignment and say, hey, in 3 days, send me the result and we'll discuss it on a call, which is incredibly easy to run through artificial intelligence today, and I'll have it perfect, yeah. Then there are companies that also do so-called live tests, where they start something for you, you fill it out there, and on the other hand, yes, it's through Zoom, it can have that AI, it can read it, yeah. That's why I'm interested. If now those companies say, hey, fine, we'll have screenings, but at the same time, we also want to have a quality system to verify that these people really know what they're doing, then what is the most effective and also the safest way? That's a very specific question.
Yeah. It gets very personal in the sense that I'm not a human resources manager. I really don't know.
But you are the CEO, so you surely know how people are selected.
Yes, and that's exactly it. There are two things that have caught up with me almost every time in my life.
Mother-in-law?
That one hasn't caught up with me yet.
Wife. No, it was that I really wanted it so much, and I believed that it would really help me. And it's like when now someone has left, I would need someone new, and suddenly someone appears from somewhere. Great. It's like pulling out that thorn from the foot. And I wanted it so much that I was willing to overlook the balloons, the warning signals, the red flags. The second thing is, I relied so terribly much. A shoemaker's children rely so terribly much on themselves that I perhaps didn't do a reference check, verify those references. Yes, definitely. So like I'm really not immune to this.
Well, the proverb, the cobbler's children have no shoes, really fits here like a lid on a pot, and
I wouldn't do it again.
maybe yes.
But I damn well know how much money it cost me because I didn't do it. And that if I had done it, it would have saved me. But to be fair, we don't do it. We offer them perhaps within Scouts, but it's not what we want to do. Honestly,
Because we don't know who the client is looking for, who is a good fit. We do ask for references, but for us, it's more,
would you hire him again? Did you work well with him? And so on. But we can't compare, like, does he work well in a remote team with 2 people and will deliver on time without making excuses? We don't know that. We also don't know what the client wants and what position they're often filling. So in this sense, so it is very complicated. We are indeed moving towards some form of automation where the client will be able to configure their questions, which will be sent automatically. And there will be many fraud checks that will identify, like, it was filled out too quickly, it was filled out by copy pasting, it was filled out from one IP address, everyone is responding too similarly, and so on. So we are able to build this, but I have no ambition or we replace the HR person. They are irreplaceable, but rather should not do the monotonous things that or tasks that don't belong to him. Because damn, even he is expensive. Even he is too good to just type out and peck away, entering a name 5 times, a direct date of birth into the justice system, into the trade licensing register, into the insolvency register, into the central office of executions. That's not right. I don't know how much a human resources specialist can earn, but this isn't his job. But the personal feeling, that feeling, to look and feel, well, that's not something technology can replace. That's something the HR person or recruiter should do, in my opinion.
So it's possible to say that if you can meet the person, just do it during the selection process. If you give a case study, it doesn't really matter because what's important for security are more the references.
It's a lot like case studies and similar things will be great for the recruitment manager for where the person is starting, right? They need to know if it will fit, how they will talk with them, and so on. The paradox is that it happened to me multiple times that the client really wanted to keep someone who got in through deception because they said, hey, they are actually quite good, and at least we know that. I say, okay, we don't care. We don't actually give a recommendation to hire or not hire. We say fit or not fit. Is there something else? We don't use the red traffic light result at all, and orange is consider, think about it, or for consideration. You consider it, not us. Something doesn't fit here.
Sure.
Well, maybe there's an objective reason, but you should ask him.
That's right. Peter, thank you for sitting here with me for over an hour.
Thank you.
It was really nice and see you again sometime.
Thank you very much.